it's Lee from colouringqueen.net, and today for my Hours in October colour along, I thought I'd colour from A Million Hours colouring book by Lulu Mayo. And I've reviewed this book previously. It's on the channel here somewhere. I love Lulu's books. They're so cute and colourful. Anyway, I messed up quite a few hours before I decided on this picture, so let's hope this one works out. And I'm going to use my Pastelo pencils for this. They're the Polish pencils that I've reviewed earlier. And yeah, let's dive in. So I hope you guys are all doing well today. It feels like ages since we've had a chat. So I don't know what you guys have been up to, but you know, up here, nothing much has happened. We went out for the weekend, finally. Took Buddy up to the Sunshine Coast where there's a lot of beaches and whatnot. We basically took him on a tour of beaches. So he went to 3 beaches and he dived into the water. You couldn't keep him out of it, and he was that happy. It was so funny. So he had a really good time, which is good because the next day he went to the vets and for his regular checkup, and unfortunately they've increased all his pills, so the poor little thing's on like 9 pills a day now to control his epilepsy or to help manage it. But you know, hopefully it'll work out, this increased dosage for him, because it's really hard when your little pets have problems. So yeah, he had a good time, and then the next day I think I was feeling a little bit distracted, so I accidentally left his treat cupboard open when I went to go to the doctor's. Anyway, I came back and he'd eaten an entire packet of dental bones, an entire packet of liver treats. He'd got out Millie's cat food, ripped it open, and I think both of them ate that and tucked into it because Millie didn't want a dinner that night. And he'd eaten some little popcorn things that he'd got for his birthday and some little yogurt treat things that he'd got for his birthday, and a whole packet of doggy brownies. So you would think that he wouldn't be hungry and wouldn't want his dinner because he must have eaten so much of it. But it turns out he still did want his dinner. But he's on a strict diet now. The vet said that he was actually not the right size, so he's been getting a lot of vegetables and celery and whatnot in his diet now, and he's not really happy about it. I can't blame him. I mean, we've all gained a few COVID pounds. Speaking of, you know, the COVID, as most of you know, I've got needle anxiety, so David went and had his jab yesterday, the first one, and he checked with them that he could come with me to get my shot. So I'm going on Saturday. You'll probably hear the screams from across the pond as I freak out, but so I have to kind of get it done because his parents, his mother, sorry, and his brother are coming up for Christmas, so hopefully they come this time. It's been 3 times, and each time they've had to cancel because of border closures and whatnot, so hopefully they're coming this time. And as she's elderly and they've both had their jabs, and as the borders are going to open here for Christmas, I kind of have to get it done. So I am very anxious about it, but I'm just hope, you know, with David being there and the staff seem pretty good and understanding of people. I'm not the only one. Apparently it's a really common anxiety disorder, so I know, you know, they must have experienced people that freak out before, and I just hope that I can get through it and, you know, get it all done and without too much stress for me and everyone else involved. But I just want it over and done with right now, you know. I don't want to keep thinking about it, but I think I'm going Saturday morning because that's more convenient for David, and with my arm still in a brace for a few more weeks, I'm finding it really difficult to drive. because I've got a manual car, unfortunately, and so doing the gears and stuff is really difficult when your hand's in a brace, which I never realised I used my left hand for so much. It's just unbelievable. So I think I'll get them to jab it in that arm, seeing I'm, out of action on it anyway. But David didn't have any side effects, just other than a little mild headache, so I hope I don't get any. I really feel like I've had a bad enough year already. So we'll get this little owl done. I'm thinking about pastel colours for it. And I know owls aren't very Halloweenish and like when they're cute like this, but it is Halloween in the US, and although it's not really that popular in Australia, I thought I'd better, you know, do something Halloween-ish. So today I thought I'd give you two stories with a bit of a Halloween flavour. And so I nipped over to the US because there's nothing much in Australia that's Halloween related. And it's really, last year we were the only ones that gave out candy or lollies to the kids. There's not really much going on. So I thought I'd come at America, and I found a couple of little Halloween stories that you might get something out of, might enjoy, or might learn something. So the best thing I think about Halloween is getting dressed up, and that's what I would love to do. I'd love to go trick-or-treating as an adult. And we just didn't have it when I was a kid. I mean, I got to take out my fantasies of dressing up because I did drama when I was a kid. And so I got to play dress-ups all the time. But going out and trick-or-treating dressed up, that would be my ideal. And if I had to, I would go as Betty Boop because she's my favourite cartoon character, and I've been collecting Betty Boop stuff for, half my life. And also when I was a kid, even though Halloween wasn't a thing in Australia, I lived on a farm, so walking to the next door neighbours would take all night to get any sort of candy, so it wouldn't be worth the effort. But things have changed now, and maybe one day I'll get to dress up as Betty Boop and David can be Betty's sidekick Pudgy, or he can be Coco the Clown. I don't know. I'd love to know if any of the adults out there get dressed up for Halloween. I think that would be the best. But anyway, in today's story, Susan Felito, she managed to get her husband, Frank, to dress up as a sheep for Halloween. And she dressed up as Mary from Mary Had a Little Lamb, and they went to a Halloween party. And Susan was actually quite handy, and she made Frank's costume all by herself. And I guess back in 1984, when this story took place, there weren't as many costume and costume hire places around. Certainly no Amazon for ordering up those fancy dress clothes. So how do you go about making a fluffy lamb costume? Well, it's pretty easy. You grab your Johnson & Johnson cotton balls and you glue madly onto a pair of long johns. You know, the long underwear that people often wear in the cold. She also made a little headpiece with ears and covered it with cotton balls too. And I wish I had a picture of this because it sounds adorable. So all up, Frank was covered from head to ankles with cotton balls, except for his face and hands. And on his face and hands, what he did was put black paint on them. And so he ended up looking like a little black and white sheep, like a Suffolk sheep or a Scottish blackface. They're cute as a button. Google them if you don't know what they look like. And so all was going well at the party, and the couple were having a pretty good time until Frank tried to light his cigarette with a butane lighter. And the flame of the lighter just sort of glanced past his left arm where the cotton balls were, and it went up in flames. In the end, Frank actually suffered burns to a third of his body. So obviously there's a lot of medical expenses involved in that, and Frank and Susan decided that they should sue Johnson & Johnson, the maker of the cotton balls. on the basis that the product didn't have a warning that it was flammable, and it obviously went up in flames and caused Frank a lot of harm. So on the packaging for the cotton balls, it said they're meant to be used for cleansing your face, applying medications, and infant care. But of course, we've all used cotton balls at some stage in our life, haven't we? I mean, I've used them to make decorative clouds or fluffy snowmen on craft paper, but most of us haven't covered ourselves from head to toe in them and then lit a cigarette. So in order to succeed, Frank and Susan would need to prove all the elements of negligence. And as well, they'd also need to prove that had a warning been on the cotton ball packaging, that they wouldn't have used the cotton balls to make the costume. Interesting enough, when this went to trial in 1989, which is a long time, 5 years, so the US system seems to be as slow as the Australian system to get through court. At the trial, Justice Freeman actually found in favour of Frank and Susan, and he awarded damages to Frank of over $500,000 and to Susan $70,000. Now, back in 1989, that's a significant amount of money. Anyway, judgment was entered in their favour, but of course Johnson & Johnson appealed, and you can't expect them not to. For this sort of case, the judge actually, the same judge that hears the trial, also hears the appeal. In Australia, we don't do it that way, but back in 1989, in this particular court in the US, that's the way it worked. And unfortunately, why the judge was thinking about how he would decide the appeal for Johnson & Johnson that they had submitted, and please excuse any Millie walking across this picture, it's very off-putting. He actually died, and so they had to get a full transcript of what happened at the trial in order for a new judge to make a decision. So he had to read through all of that transcript from the earlier trial, go through all the statements and hear any arguments that were being presented. Now, on appeal, you don't get to bring up new evidence unless it's something really significant, and there wasn't anything significant in this case. The thing is, when the judge went through the trial transcript, he seen that when the couple were asked if they would use the cotton balls if the warning was on there, both of them actually said that they would. And so there would be no point in Johnson & Johnson putting a statement on the cotton balls if people would still continue to use them in any event. And when they went back through the trial transcript, they also found that both of them knew the cotton balls would burn when exposed to any sort of flame. And both of them said that. And Frank said he knew at the time that the cotton batting would burn if exposed to an open flame. So it's kind of curious to me what they were actually suing for. Like, if they're saying they want a label on the cotton balls to say that they're flammable, they both said that they knew that, so they didn't need a label. They're also not using the product for the purpose it was made, and both of them said that they would use it in any event if the label had been there or not. So it's kind of confusing what their argument actually was. And the court sort of found the same way. So none of the evidence suggested that Johnson & Johnson were responsible, because to be negligent, you have to be able to foresee that these sorts of injuries might arise. Like if you have a cliff and there's a walkway next to it and there's no fencing, you might reasonably foresee that someone might fall over the edge. But Johnson & Johnson wouldn't be able to foresee in their magic crystal ball that someone would use their cotton balls and make a lamb costume and light a cigarette next to it. It's kind of not foreseeable, although they do of course know that people use them for crafty projects and make snowballs and stuff. They don't actually cover themselves head to toe in it, use glue which is a chemical and usually flammable. I don't know what sort of glue that they used, and then put an open flame next to it. They can't reasonably be expected to foresee that people would use them in that particular way. So unless you can sort of see, and it's a sort of a reasonable assumption that people might use it in this sort of way, you can't really be held negligent. And in the end, Johnson & Johnson succeeded. Unfortunately, Frank and Susan were left without that previously lovely judgment for damages in their favour, and Mary and her little lamb were unable to recover anything. So it's kind of pretty sad, because at the end of the day, Frank, still had those 1/3 of burns to his body, and no doubt that would have affected his work, his personal life, and of course his emotional and mental wellness. But really, at the end of the day, it's kind of a tragic accident. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think the second judge on this case definitely got it right, and I don't know what happened with the first judge, because personally I didn't see why they were awarded damages in the first place. But I'd love to hear what you think. Always like to have a discussion on these sorts of things, but I think the judge really got it right the second time on appeal. So the next little story I thought I'd tell you is about something I've never heard of before, and obviously in Australia we're not really into Halloween, so maybe that's why. But the second story is going to take us to Louisiana, which has to be one of my favourite places in the US. I just love it. I'd love to go back. Just had such a good time there, and the people are just so lovely. And the accent, oh, it's so divine. Anyway, I won't do my fake accent, but I had no idea until I read about this case in Louisiana that there's such a thing called a corn maze. Not M-A-I-Z-E, but like an actual maze where people go through like a path and they've got to try and find their way out. So not only is there a maze made of corn, there's a company called Maze, M-A-I-Z-E, which is like a lovely play on words, that has a whole business around creating mazes for people to go through and find their way out. Now, who would have ever thought of that? Certainly not me. I had to Google it and see if this sort of thing still exists, and apparently it does. And at Halloween, these companies do what's called a haunted maze event. So you can go through different mazes of like easy peasy and a lot harder, and you can get scared during the Halloween season while you're going through the maze. Like, I had no idea at this. I am actually amazed. But anyway, let's move on. So in 2002, a husband and wife couple bought into a franchise called Maze, M-A-I-Z-E, where, you guessed it, they created mazes and charged people to enter the maze. Now, who would have ever thought that that would have been a franchise idea? Certainly not me. Anyway, the Billingses, the husband and wife couple, they got busy and they created their mazes in time for the fall, or autumn as we call it in Australia, Halloween season. And they had an easy peasy one where I'd probably get lost and need a trail of breadcrumbs to get out of. And they had a second longer maze that also was a haunted experience. And finally, the most complicated maze. And so customers could choose either of the three mazes to go through. And these mazes were huge. The paths on them covered over 5 miles. And throughout the maze, they had staff on board called corn cops. I just love that. And they'd be on hand just in case anyone got distressed or, needed help in getting out, etc. So they were all throughout the maze, and they had torches and whatnot. So quite well secured. And so if customers chose the spooky maze, they pass all sorts of stuff, designed to scare you. Some skeletons, some creepy pumpkins, your cobwebs, I don't know. All sorts of creepy stuff designed to scare you. And it culminated in Jason from Friday the 13th brandishing a chainsaw. Now, there was no risk of harm from the chainsaw. Don't worry, this is not going to turn out bloody and gory because the actual chain had been taken out. So on 11th of October 2002, Gracie Derman was accompanying her church youth group that were attending the maze that night, and she was the adult of the group. The group had paid for the admission costs to the Easy Peasy maze and also to the second maze, which was running the haunted house theme. And as they made their way through the maze, the sound of the chainsaws starting up was in the distance, and it was part of the atmosphere to try and scare them because, after all, they've paid extra and an extra admission fee for this scary experience. So they started out at 7 o'clock, making their way through the Easy Peasy maze, and Gracie noticed that the ground was pretty muddy. She wasn't put off though. She was a little bit worried about her shoes being damaged and her foot sinking into the mud, but she still continued on to the second maze that was the haunted one and a little bit harder. And by 9:15, she'd finished most of the maze, and as she went to the exit, out popped Jason, dressed with the full costume, orange jumpsuit, white hockey mask, and he's holding this chainsaw over his head. So frightened, she tried to turn and run away, and she actually fell and she broke part of her leg near her ankle, her tibia and fibula, and she actually needed surgery to repair the injury. So approximately 1,500 people had gone through the maze that night, and no one else had fallen over. The only other reported accident or fall during the entire season was a fall sustained by a lady that had only one leg, and she wasn't injured. So this night out ended up turning out very badly for Gracie, and she ended up having to get the surgery on her tibia and fibula, and your medical costs in the US are just so expensive. And so she decided that she would sue the owner and their insurer for negligence. Her argument was that her injuries were the result of the owner's negligence, and on the night of the haunted maze event, the owners should not have been operating at all because the paths were really muddy that night. There'd been a lot of rain over time, and she knew it was muddy. She'd already gone through the first maze, and there were no signs along the path to warn customers of the muddy conditions. But when she was questioned, she admitted that the mud hadn't caused her any concern other than worrying about her shoes and being stuck in it. And the owners and the insurers, they took the view that they agreed totally with the facts that she fell, that the ground was muddy, but they said that there was absolutely no negligence arising from those facts. And the reason why is that you could easily see that the ground was muddy. She'd already gone through the first maze and knew it was muddy. And it wasn't actually the mud that caused her to fall. It was the Jason character startling her, and it was her reaction to turn and run from being frightened that resulted in her falling over. And the thing is, she'd paid for an experience where she knew it was going to be scary, and she expected to be scared, and guess what? She got scared. And so the court didn't find in favour of Gracie. They said that the injuries were caused by her reaction rather than the conditions at the time. And she, of course, appealed, but it didn't change the result because she knew that the purpose of the haunted maze was to scare, surprise, and startle the customers. And she expected to be frightened. She'd paid more to be frightened, and she got frightened. She got what she paid for. And she also testified that she'd heard the chainsaw even before entering phase 2, so she knew that a chainsaw was used in the haunting. The court found in favour of the owners of the maze and their insurer that they didn't owe Gracie a duty to protect her from her own reactions to being scared. It was her fear of the Jason character that caused her to react, and they also weren't obliged to warn her of the muddy conditions, as they were clearly obvious to anyone that walked through. You could actually see it. It wasn't what's called a patent defect, where it's hidden. So like a sinkhole, for example, that looks normal, and then you step in it and down you go. So I'd love to know what you guys think. I actually think the court got it right again for this one, because it wasn't the mud that caused her to slip, it was the fear of the character. But I'd love to know what you think. And when I was looking at these, there were so many funny law cases. Not funny for the people involved, but weird, the things that people would sue about. And I think a lot of that is because the medical system in the US is very expensive, but also often we're quite litigious, and often people lose a lot of time off work and they need to recover the money, their loss of income. Especially in America as well, you don't have as many holidays or sick days, as I understand it, that you can claim on. So there's a lot of reasons that people might think some of these cases are silly or whatnot, but they're really not, because often, people really need to recover the amount of money that they've spent, or they don't have the money. And sometimes a lot of these injuries can have long-lasting effects, and, injuries that you might have got 20, 30 years ago will come back, and you might need treatment 30 years later or 20 years later, or it might just never go away and really cause you to lose sorts of enjoyment or things that you could do in your life. So I perfectly understand why both of them sued. I don't think the little Mary Had a Little Lamb argument was very good. I think they could have framed that a lot better. I think they sort of lost a little bit with their own testimony. They put their foots in their mouth on that one. But with the maze, I can sort of understand that when the conditions are a bit muddy, that you might feel that there should be some signs. But the thing is, usually in law, when you can clearly see that something is there and then you still pursue it, you generally don't get compensation. But you never know. But I did see some other, cases as well that, I'll see if I've got time to talk about, maybe next time we meet up. But there was even sort of an argument about when you're getting dressed up, whether you're actually impersonating somebody for the night, which I thought was hilarious. Like, if you get dressed up as Einstein, are you liable for false impersonation of someone? Which I think sometimes people can take things a little bit too far. And unfortunately, it's, when that happens, that genuine cases where people have got a genuine grievance, they're stuck in the system and not able to get to the top of the queue and hopefully get their matter resolved in their favour. But certainly I had a fun time looking at some of the cases from the US. And I guess, in a few more years, maybe a bit more, we'll start to see those sorts of cases filtering into Australia as we embrace Halloween a little bit more. Kind of looking forward to that. So I guess the moral of the story is that if you go to a scary place, expect to be scared. But I'd love to know what you think of the two stories. I'd love to know if you agree with me or disagree with me that the judges got it right. I think they both got it right, definitely. I was really shocked when I read that the Mary Had a Little Lamb was actually awarded over $500,000 in that first case I told you about. I was stunned. Um, but then on appeal, it righted itself. Thank goodness for that, is my view. But I would love to know your view, and I'm always happy to agree to disagree. So that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.